Now I was hoping we could all introduce ourselves. So if you could share your name and your parish, and then what you're hoping to get out of this evening. And we can start with Mary Ann.
Hello there, my name is Mary Ann Barth, and I live in Northern Kentucky, and my home parish really is Mother of God Parish. However, I do work at St. Rita's School for the Deaf. I'm there at St. Rita's School for the Deaf, and I'm sorry, I'm in charge. I work in the Archdiocese. The interpreter's asking for clarification here. Her screen froze. So I work at St. Rita's on multiple capacities, multiple responsibilities. This year I'm doing a lot of assessments.
Great. All right.
Nice to meet you too.
Now we'll move on to Mary Jane.
Hello there. My name is Mary Jane Ernst, and I also work at St. Rita's. I attend St. Rita. I go to St. Rita's parish every Sunday, but I am now going to be in the process of retiring and leaving soon. So I probably may look at joining St. Bartholomew's Church over on the west side. It's kind of what I'm thinking. My children there are interested, so I have grandchildren there.
Great.
Nice to meet you too.
All right, Bob, do you want to go ahead?
My name is Bob Wurzelbacher. I'm the director of the Respect Life office and the new office for persons with disabilities. And I've been in this position for about 3 years. I've met Mary Ann Barth before a few times. Mary Ann, good to see you again. I am so inspired by your patience. I've been there for 3 years and we're still trying to glaze your speed, as they say, right? Trying to make some change in the church, but we certainly hope that we're continuing to move in the right direction and that this will be another step, Mary Ann, of us being more aware of how we can better serve, especially the deaf community here in our archdiocese. So thank you all for being here today.
Okay, Jill.
Need to sign or use the interpreter. Sign, doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, it's up to you.
Okay, just a brief introduction. My name is Jill Sweehus. Jill. I'm an interpreter from Mother of God Church in Covington, Kentucky. My actual home parish is really St. Philip Church.
Great. Thank you.
Short.
All right, Eileen.
Hello, this is Eileen Chambers. And I also work at St. Rita's School for the Deaf. I am one of the educators there. I'm a teacher there. And really, as far as my parish, I don't have a specific one. I kind of jump from parish to parish. I go to St. Rita's Chapel every Sunday, and Good Shepherd Church. Oftentimes, and I'll also go over to Mother of God Church. And then I'll find myself over at St. Jude's Church. So trying to find interpreters who may be available. So I'm kind of jumping, I find out interpreters over there, I'll drive over there or over here, wherever I can find an interpreter. So I find myself kind of traveling all around. So it kind of depends, especially now with COVID now, we're all stuck and stranded at home. And so I'm finding live streaming opportunities. And so Father Mike Depic in Michigan is providing a live stream. And so I kind of keep track with that. So, so I know some of the parishes are starting to open, but typically I'm mainly online right now on live stream.
Sure. Great. Okay. Nick, do you
think
want?
I may have met Noelle. I think I may have met you. Um, did you visit St. Rita's at one
I did
time
with Adam.
with Adam?
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Yes.
Yes, I do remember meeting you. So I remember meeting you there.
Yeah.
Yes, and so that was before school closed, all before all of that happened. So
Right before. Yeah.
yep, it was. It was right before school closed.
Yes. Great. Thank you. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Nick. I'm your interpreter today.
Great. My name. I'm learning to sign. Working on it. I can finger spell pretty well.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes, I'm the Associate Director for the Office for Persons with Disabilities. I'm just really on fire for deaf ministry. I've met Father Sean Carey. Are you guys familiar with him? He's a deaf priest in Boston, and he runs 2 parishes on his own. He's amazing. And we had a really great 2-hour conversation that lit me on fire. So I'm really hoping we can bring some of that energy here to the Archdiocese and make some more exciting things happen for the deaf community here. So, yeah. Great. All right. So I'm not going to turn the PowerPoint back on because I feel like I don't have it set up correctly where I can see you and you can see me and we can have a PowerPoint. So I'll put the questions in the chat. How does that sound? That way I'll put up one question at a time that we can all respond to, and I'll put it in the chat, and then that way people can respond, and then I'll post the next one. All right, there it is. So our first question is, what are some barriers that you have encountered in your parish? And you can just raise your hand when you want to speak. Eileen.
Yes, this is Eileen. Years and years ago, I had gone to a parish called St. Michael's over in Sharonville. So, and they used to have an interpreted service on Saturday evenings, which I enjoyed going there on Saturday evenings. They had a 5 o'clock communion service sacrament there. And so they had an interpreter there. And I believe one time I just showed up, there was not an interpreter. And then from then on, they didn't have an interpreter. I called and said, well, what happened? Well, we're not providing interpreters any longer. We decided just to stop. And that was all there was. And so that was one of those barriers, those frustrating moments that I encountered, because there are not very many churches at all who are providing interpreting access and services whatsoever, especially for the deaf community who want to attend church. And, they don't have to drive some incredibly far distance. They prefer to be able to go somewhere a little more local to them. And it's essential that they provide interpreting access. And so that's one of the things I discovered with Good Shepherd. And so they have 2 interpreters there on Sunday morning. And so I don't know if they're still doing that at this time currently. I'm not certain if they still do, but I was aware at the time that they did. And so I know that they were doing that before coronavirus broke out. So, I'm not certain if and I don't live, and that a gentleman that did not live in the area, drove in from Indiana. He was commuting back and forth to provide interpreting services there.
Wow. Now, Eileen, you had said earlier that you feel like you have to jump to find interpreting services. Is it not consistent at parishes?
No, not at all.
That's
So
unfortunate.
that's why I have to travel around. So you hear about this church, and I'll go over to St. Jude's, over in Bridgetown. I enjoy the Saturday evening mass. If they don't have a conflict with the schedule, then I try to grab that opportunity. It's a beautiful church, but it's quite a distance. And so Good Shepherd Church is here pretty close to my home, and I'll occasionally try to go there.
Okay, great. So that's a good place that they've had interpreters thus far, but we need to check and see if they're still providing that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I am a parishioner at St. Francis in Centerville, and our parish has had an interpreter the whole time. We live stream interpreted mass. And we right now only have 1 or 2 people from the deaf community who are comfortable attending, but our intent is to continue to do that.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's
Now, what's
far
the name
away,
of your
though.
church again? Can you repeat the name of your church? I missed it.
St. Francis in Centerville. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I know that's far when you live in Cincinnati.
Yes, it is a distance. Of course. That's our life.
So, okay. Does anyone else want to say anything? Marianne?
Yes, as I begin to think about some of the barriers that we face, I think interpreting access is one. I think an additional barrier too is as far as faith development, and the formations.
Yes.
And because there's really nothing that is available. And I think that, if I begin talking about really truly providing access, for faith and for Bible study opportunities and faith formations, CCD, also RCIA, and everything else is all hearing driven, that hearing people have accessible to them. Deaf do not have access to any of those things.
Right.
And so it's not only just the interpreters for Mass specifically, but we need interpreting access to every other program that is being offered.
Right.
So if we want to truly be inclusive, and I have a full membership and full functioning role as a member of that local parish. And so not to my knowledge do we see that is not happening anywhere. The Archdiocese of Cincinnati, I know it's not happening. And so in Northern Kentucky, we do have interpreters. However, it is not the same. That's not as being inclusive. And so that's a different approach.
Right.
As we begin to see how there's a full membership, for the church, for me and myself. I moved to, where I live is quite some distance, so it's quite a commute for me to have to try to go back to Mother of God Church. And that's the only church in all of Northern Kentucky. The next closest one is going to be in Louisville, Kentucky.
Wow.
And so for me, it is very, very difficult. And the closest for me to go is to Cincinnati. However, again, with the priests leaving St. Rita's, we no longer have a signing priest. And now, so that has become a barrier of multiple levels. So interpreters are one barrier, but there's a plethora of others that we see
Right.
here.
Mm-hmm. It's very hard. Go ahead.
And I would also like to add that, as far as not only with just signing and sign language communication, but also the knowledge of what it means with deaf culture, having a functional understanding of deaf community and being deaf friendly. Having a church that is deaf friendly, which means that there's an understanding, true understanding of deaf individuals, that they're not ear people, they're eye people. you know? And so they begin to think about, as they listen with their eyes. And so what does church mean for those individuals? As they begin to sit in the audience, what does it look like for visually, you know, as far as what they're seeing and not able to see, because they hear with their eyes.
Right. Thank you. All right. Anybody else have anything?
This is Mary Jane. I kind of echo their sentiments. I feel the same.
Okay. All right. So I'll post the next question. The next question, well, I think we already covered that one. It was how does your parish work to accommodate the needs of the deaf community? But from what I'm hearing, it doesn't sound like beyond providing an interpreter, that's really happening very well. So we'll skip that question and move on to the next one. How can parishes of the Archdiocese better meet the spiritual needs of the deaf community? Not just going to Mass.
You know, I think as far as what I'm trying to describing, when you think about spiritual needs, I think we need to define that. You know, we need to have a good definition. You know, when you
Okay,
think about,
sure.
it's not just Mass, as I mentioned.
Right.
You know, and so you think there's a whole host of things that are there. And so for me, when I started listing out all of these different components, it kind of goes into what we just touched on with the spiritual formations. And it's just not happening. And we
Right.
think about how, and we've got to make it happen. You know, for us to begin to see how we can start educating, you know, where we can see more teaching and learning that's taking place, where we're providing, you know, team and purpose, perhaps maybe a deaf person paired with a hearing person, working collaboratively in a team environment. And so they can start learning the deaf way. The deaf way can learn some of these information. The Archdiocese providing the spiritual direction as far as faith formations. And I believe that, you know, you begin to think about it meets some of the needs, and also begin to think about providing, you know, the hearing way, which that is there, you know, and then we also need to think about having that idea of a mentoring or a team approach to where they begin to discover the deaf way also. I know for me, Noel, I know you're beginning to learn sign, and that's fantastic, you know. And I find that deaf individuals, as they begin to look at some of these ideas, finding those individuals who could become a team mentor, a deaf and a hearing mentor team, you know, I begin to think about that mentoring of one another. And so that way the deaf person can begin to learn what some of the meanings are behind what the services that the offices provide, what your office provides.
Right.
And so they can begin to understand the role and function, so they become a collaborative partner.
That's great. Thank you. Yes, that's great. Anybody else? What are some things that,
This is Eileen. Mary Ann just said it all for us.
great.
Mary said, I got to cut it short. I'll let the others talk, I guess.
So I'm going to take a little sidebar from this question, and I'm going to ask if we're hoping to put together a commission eventually for people with disabilities. That's going to be a goal that we are hoping to accomplish. And our hope is to have some advocates on there for people who have developmental disabilities, but we would like to have some members of the deaf community serving on that as well, to represent the deaf community and communicate some needs in that capacity, so that we can start providing better adaptive catechesis and adaptive, that one's catechesis is a hard word to translate probably. One of those fancy Catholic words. But it's one of those things that we're kind of hoping to, you know, make sure that the deaf community has a voice in the Archdiocese. Would any of you think that that would be a good idea or a good first step? What are your thoughts about that? Mm-hmm.
This is Eileen. I think it's a tremendous idea.
Great.
Marianne, I would agree.
Okay, good.
This is Marianne.
Yes.
I think it would be a tremendous and awesome idea to begin to see some representation from the deaf community. I would say also looking at, as far as representation within the office, and they need to begin to see that they will commit funding for interpreters. It shouldn't have to be an argument. We shouldn't have to fight for it or feel like, okay, this is too much to ask to have them pay for an interpreter. But understand that we have the rights to have that interpreting access, and we need qualified interpreters, especially for those commission meetings. It's essential
Certainly.
that we have
Absolutely.
qualified, because I can't respond to some of the hearing individuals. I mean, I can respond as far as I can speak for the deaf community, with some of the questions and kind of get surveys and get that information and come back and share. But I think it's essential that deaf individuals are part of that commission.
Yes, we certainly would have an interpreter present. Absolutely. That would be something that would be an obvious thing that we would do 100%. Yeah, because it's important for us to be able to understand what you're saying, just as it's important for you to understand what hearing people are saying. So, yes. Great. Okay, so building off of that, what are some other things that we can do from an archdiocesan standpoint to help parishes better support the deaf community? Eileen.
I would say, and now I could be wrong, but I think there are many parishes that are there who are just ignorant. They don't know, they don't know how to engage the deaf community, to involve them. So they end up just kind of leaving the deaf community out, and they're isolated. And I think it's out of ignorance, and so, and some of this, sometimes there could be an attitude of showing deaf individuals that, they don't attend, so because there's no accessibility.
Right.
And so then there's this a lack of compassion or lack of attitude of trying to include deaf community only because it's out of ignorance. They're unaware, as far as finding ways, how do we educate our parishes and our leaders to understand the needs about those who live in those communities around those individual churches, to become more deaf friendly, to understand that deaf are humans just like hearing people. The only difference between us is we can't hear, and that's all.
Right. Marianne.
I kind of, to dovetail on what Eileen is saying, I want to add to, I've been kind of contemplating and thinking about would it be possible for us to look at having, this idea of the teams, the deaf and hearing mentor teams, that could go over to I'm trying to think of the right spelling of it. Is it Denarius? Denarius, Deneris. I don't know if I spell it right. The groups where the priests get together, their cohorts, where they gather together.
Oh,
they're groups of the
Deaneries.
priests.
Deaneres.
Yes, that's it. And so perhaps, looking at starting with those audiences, of getting those priests together, a half hour, as far as raising deaf awareness, raising some of the ideas of deaf culture, raising some of the components of, it's almost like that Deaf Culture 101 and abbreviated in 30 minutes or less. But at least it's a starting point. When we think about those become those groups as they gather together, with the idea is they then spread back into their communities, and then we have interpreters, that we start recruiting and working and having interpreters to start somewhere. I mean, I'm just throwing out an idea to brainstorm. Is all that I'm doing.
I think that's a great idea. I like the idea of the teams working together, because and it would be, if we could come up with something that would be very dynamic to present at these deanery meetings, I think we could reach a lot of pastors that haven't thought about it before. It would be nice to have a parish in each region, not just in each deanery, that had some sort of service for people from the deaf community. Yes. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, yeah, I had to mute because my dogs were barking. Anyway, this is Bob. Yes, I agree. I think that it should be very possible to put together a team, small team, like a pair, right? Or a trio, to put together a presentation suitable for deaneries. And I believe we could get the audience of most deaneries, at least when they start meeting again. I'm not sure if they're meeting, right?
The Northern Deanery is, because I went to their most recent meeting, but
typically I can request to get on the schedule of a deanery meeting. So we should be able to do that.
yeah, that would be great. That would be great. One thing also that our pastor at St. Francis and I were talking about recently is the sacrament of reconciliation, and how difficult that has been for him to develop that trust with the deaf community, because he does not know how to sign yet. He's also trying to learn to better meet the needs of the community at our parish. But our former pastor was fluent in ASL, and that was like a huge blessing. His parents were both deaf, and he's since passed away. So it's been really unfortunate, because he would come and do reconciliation once a month. But what has been your experience with the sacrament of reconciliation? Do you go, or is it inconvenient and uncomfortable? Marianne?
This is Marianne. Well, as far as, about for the sacraments of reconciliation,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, I'm just going to be very blunt with you. I don't want an interpreter there.
No, yes.
Just to be very direct, and we don't have any direct access. There's nobody to provide direct access for. There's one priest in the state of Kentucky who lives in Louisville, who's only part-time, and he's only part-time. And so we don't have a single priest that we can go directly to. So for majority of deaf people, I would presume, would they go into the sacrament of reconciliation? I don't think so. It's not happening.
Right.
It's not happening for those of us that live in Kentucky, I know. And now I would not feel comfortable. No offense to our interpreter.
No.
None at all. And so, but I just would not feel comfortable. I would rather have direct communication access.
Eileen? Mm-hmm.
I guess this is Eileen. I remember a long time ago. There's a group of hearing people that had gone to church, but they weren't going to sit down to talk with the priest one-on-one, but they were in kind of a larger setting, and a kind of an audience setting where they would do that sacrament of reconciliation in an audience setting, more collectively as a congregation. I remember going with my grandmother years ago. I'm like, what are we doing this? And said, well, this is about reconciliation. And so, they were talking about something. I couldn't hear anything. So many of the deaf would not feel comfortable at all because of the lack of trust, and I think that that's a big part of that. And now, as far as if they have interpreters that are set there in that kind of a congregational setting of that reconciliation sacrament, that I don't know if they would attend that either. But I can't remember. I just remember vaguely going. I can't remember everything that we did, but I remember going with my grandmother a long time ago. But that's it.
Marianne.
Well, I kind of think related, kind of again, piggybacking on what Eileen had to say. I'm also thinking about with like my parents who were hearing, and if they had, or other hearing parents who have deaf children, where do they go for their faith formation for their children, for those sacraments, for sacrament preparations? Where do they go for that?
Right.
So there's no place for them to be able to go as hearing parents with deaf children.
Yes.
So now deaf parents with hearing children, they run into, there's some deaf young people. So, there's so, this has become overwhelming as you start to think about, like when I met Bob 3 years ago and I tried to warn you, I was like, Bob, this is getting overwhelming. We can't even we have to start somewhere. And finally, this is a start. This is a first step. It's actually a second step. Bob took that first step and now this is the second step.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you. Yes. So, as far as reconciliation goes, one of the solutions that our pastor has thought of is the possibility of having a whiteboard in the confessional, where people can, write stuff down and then it would be erased so that no one could see it after the confession. I don't think that's the perfect solution, obviously, but for a priest that wants to try to better meet the needs of the deaf community, do you think that's a reasonable solution that gets us one step in the right direction?
Well, this is Eileen. Well, you got some language issues, and so there could be misunderstandings between, because there are many deaf individuals who are not fluent in English,
Okay.
as far as English grammar, and so a priest that doesn't understand ASL gloss could totally misunderstand and have some misunderstandings of the contextualization of that confession.
Sure.
And so I don't know if that would be a good idea if they're not fluent in that, because there's so many margin of error and misunderstanding, and it's not only just deaf individuals, but I it's not just one or two who struggle with language, but there's a majority.
Right.
Sorry, their reading and their writing, and their expressive skills, and they may not understand what the priest is writing, and they're reading that going, I don't know what they're talking about, and then suddenly it becomes a very negative experience instead of a healing experience.
That makes a lot of sense. ASL and English are very different.
Exactly. Yes.
So yes, that is. Now another thing, homily wise, what does that look like when you have an interpreter? Even with an interpreter, when a priest is giving a homily, does it always translate well? What's that like?
Oh my goodness, where do I even start? Oh, there are some interpreters who get stuck because they don't know some of the signs. So they may not translate. Perhaps the priest may be speaking so quickly and the interpreter can't keep up and is basically trying to chase the speaker. And so there's so much information that can get lost. Or maybe, they kind of get stuck on finger spelling some terminology and suddenly we get, we lose the source of the message. And that's a challenge. The idea of we need our priest to speak a little slower. It's like slow down just a little bit. So the interpreter also needs to be aware of the terminology of the Catholic Church. Many interpreters out there, not all of them are Catholic. They have all types of backgrounds. And so they may not be as familiar with the Catholic terminology that may be delivered in a homily. And so that background and what does that look like in the Catholic background. And so if they're not aware of those things, it hinders the interpretation.
That better train our priests. Yes. Thank you. Marianne.
We have a name sign for some of our priests, and so I remember one specific name sign for a priest in northern Kentucky, and Jill would know this priest, and we named this priest Father O, but his name sign was Father, and just all over
the place.
So he was never on point. He was just always just all over the place. And that was our name sign for him. We felt for him, I felt sorry for our interpreters trying to keep track of what they're trying to communicate. And we're thinking, oh no. And so that's the name sign that we adopted for Father O, is this. So
That's so funny. If I had a name sign, it would be Christmas, because that's what my name means. All right. Well, that is very helpful. So I'm starting to see where some of the holes are, some areas where we could maybe focus to improve things, some low-hanging fruit, if you will, to maybe assist, especially at parishes that have ASL interpreters already, to help the priests work with those interpreters better to meet the needs of the deaf community. Eileen.
yes. I've experienced some interpreters who are a lot older, and so their signs are very different. It's almost like they're the old style signs, and then you have the younger generation going, I don't understand that interpreter, what they're signing, because they're signing all the old signs. And so the younger people are going, there's a disconnect. And so they're struggling with trying to understand the signs of from the older generation. And they're like, I'm younger and I don't understand the interpreter. And so that can also become a challenge for understanding, that kind of give another negative taste from that experience.
So it would be good to try to make sure that we get interpreters that are recommended in our parishes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, and the interpreters, yes, but also seeing those who use old signs, there are going to be some signs that they may not recognize because it's a generationally driven sign. Maybe it's an old sign that's used years and years ago, but it's no longer, practiced and used.
Right.
And so, for example, this is maybe a little off topic, but my sister worked with an older deaf senior citizen that I met. And some of the signs that deaf lady used, I didn't even know. She was pulling some old school signs, and just the generational difference. So you have generational differences in language understanding and acquisition.
Yeah. That would be frustrating. Mm-hmm. Yes. Great. All right. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to share? Jill, you haven't said anything. I would love to hear from you. Or anybody else that at the table that would like to share something. I do want to wrap up with some concrete takeaways so that we have a next step, if you will. So this isn't just a conversation, but something that's going to get us somewhere. I would love to hear any suggestions or any ideas that you might have, so that we can get those down moving forward. Mary Jane.
One of my concerns that I currently have right now is there are many parishes that do not have the same priest, because they tend to, travel from parish to parish. For example, my parish at St. Mark, we don't have the same priest all the time.
Right.
And so they don't know how to connect with deaf culture if they're always changing as a revolving door. So we don't know who is who.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's hard. Do you have interpreter services at your parish?
No, I do not.
Okay.
My husband is hearing, and so most of the time, I try to catch the families who are trying to lip read orally, but they're doing the sacraments. And I know the sacraments, I know those things, and so sometimes I'll go over to my children's church and kind of experience sacrament with them. But it's just kind of seeing what's going on around me.
Do they have an interpreter at their parish?
No, they do not.
Okay. So we have very few.
But there are, from time to time, my children will hire an interpreter for a special event, a special occasion, but not frequently nor consistently.
But they shouldn't have to hire an interpreter for you to go to Mass. Okay. We have work to do.
I try to lip read. I try to follow what's going on, but the homily, I'm clueless.
Right.
I hate to endure it. So
Right. Would there be a way for us to provide, like if an interpreter were to write some information down that was better translated into ASL language, but it was written that were like homily notes at a parish, would that be helpful? Also with the interpreter in tandem.
Mary Jane says that may be a good option.
Mm-hmm. Just to make it a little, that way if it's going quickly, you have something that you could look at visually as well. Eileen. Mm-hmm.
When I begin to think about, like before Mass usually starts,
Mm-hmm.
The interpreters typically try to gather notes, they try to get the music, and the homily, the interpreter can kind of glance over what's going on as far as where they're headed with the homily, so they're ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So would that be good if they were able to write stuff down that translated? Because I know, like you were saying about reconciliation, a priest writing it wouldn't necessarily translate for members of the deaf community. But if you had someone from the deaf community, like Marla from Governor DeWine's office, who's been a member of the deaf community, who's translating the translator, would that be good? Yes.
Oh yes, I think for some it would be. For some of the deaf it would be, absolutely.
So that might be an interesting ministry to look into. Mary Ann.
Kind of like Eileen was saying, I think for some deaf, yes, that would be. Now remember again, ASL itself is a visual moving language. It's not necessarily, intended to be scripted, and written down. I mean, it really, to get real meaning of ASL, if you look at trying to have it scripted, it's lost. You lose some of the intention and the meaning without the actual sign.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Well, that's great. This has been very helpful for me to kind of see where some of the major holes are. What I'm hearing, from what I've gathered from everyone, I would think that maybe our next steps would be to try to create some sort of a group that would start meeting to move in the right direction for the deaf community, to perhaps put together those presentations for the deaneries, and to maybe even talk with the Office for the New Evangelization so that we could start talking about catechesis and learning. If any of you would be interested in participating in that, we would love for you to be involved. And if you have other people who you think would be, essential to have in that group, it would be really great to have both hearing and deaf people communicating together to make this happen. What do you think about that? Yes? Okay.
This is Eileen. I think that's a tremendous idea.
Okay, good. So then what I'll do is I will go ahead and send an email out to all of you. I have your email addresses and to the people who were not able to attend tonight with follow-up information with our notes and a copy of the video of the conversation. And then we'll try to figure out a date and a time where we can meet to start doing a little planning. Does that sound all right? And anybody that wants to be involved is welcome. And if you feel like it's too much of a commitment right now, I understand that as well. But we'll try to do it on Zoom just for the sake of everyone's health right now. Does this platform work all right? Yes.
Yes, it's great. Yes.
I'm glad. Wonderful. Well, does anybody have anything else they'd like to share before we end this call?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, this is Marianne again. I would like to ask Jill, what would help you as an interpreter to be included? I know you've been involved in church interpreting for a long time, and maybe we can ask the other interpreter too. I put his thoughts on hold, but I want to ask Jill directly, your thoughts as an interpreter, what would be helpful for you? We're talking about taking notes when we receive the notes from the priest. That's not easy to get the notes from the priest. We ask and we ask and we ask and we ask again and again and again, and they don't follow through. It would be really nice to be able to help prepare ahead of time, and that rarely ever happens. I know as far as, before when there was a deaf office, and that was actually shut down. But so we have no deaf administration, we have no deaf ministries, we don't have anything there. There's no support whatsoever for us. Mm-hmm. And so we feel it's very unfortunate for the deaf community. And I think we're seeing a less involvement from the deaf community as a result of that. Less social time, less, less Bible study, and just less of everything. And there's no funding. There's nothing set aside for the deaf community whatsoever. And so the deaf community at Mother of God, they're not able to grow. We can't grow anything there. And so that's a huge problem for us. So I know that we have interpreters for Mass, and that's it. That's all. So there's nothing else available.
Right. Gosh.
So I know as far as, the deaf office closing, probably about 10 years ago. No, it was actually almost 14 years ago, Marianne said, about 14 years ago. So, before, we had leadership in place. Mm-hmm. Now there's nothing. And you see the result of that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can head in a direction here in the Archdiocese to try to make a positive impact. And sometimes if one group of people is doing it well, other people follow suit. Marianne.
It seems, I know this sounds so negative, but I would say based upon my experience, from my work experience in deaf ministries and serving the deaf community, it seems to me that the focus is always on one issue, money. And deaf individuals, it costs money to be able to do deaf work. It costs money. It shouldn't be the issue.
No.
And I would say, we have worked for years and years, and it always comes back to that argument. And that discussion leads to arguments because it's all about funding.
Right.
And and deaf people aren't going to that church. If there aren't any deaf going to that church, fine, then we will do it. Then we will provide the service. If a deaf person shows up, then we will have to do something. But it always comes down to the money. It always comes back to finances.
Right.
And that argument has been there for years. And my question would be, and I don't expect an outright answer, but my question is, the money from the Archdiocese, how much money are they willing to invest, to allocate, to make sure that we truly have deaf ministries that we have throughout our Archdiocese in Greater Cincinnati? Because it will cost money. It will. And I don't expect you to answer that question. Bob, I don't expect you to answer that question. But know that that is the huge challenge that we find. We've discussed about barriers earlier today. And one huge barrier is money. It's money. It always comes down to money. And one of those reasons that I think with the deaf office, then the Archdiocese office, why they shut it down, 100% of the reason was because of finances. They refused to pay to provide the support. Because the deaf community will never be wealthy. They're not a wealthy community. The deaf community typically tend to be working jobs that are not necessarily at their skill level. So they're making subpar pay. And so they're struggling to even survive as deaf individuals, as working class deaf. So they don't have tons of finances and financial resources at their disposal. And so if every diocese is willing to invest and support this, it will be able to continue to be sustainable. And it will be sustainable for long-term, sustainable funds that are committed to this. That way, then they begin to see about writing for grants. I have experience doing that, writing for grants. And after 5 years, the money's done. Well, the 6th year, there's no money. Guess what? We shut it down. And that has been the history of the pattern of our services. And that's the way it has been over the years.
Yeah. Okay. So I know that that'll be a barrier as we move forward. It sounds like it has been for a long time. I'm hoping we can make some baby steps and try to, at least improve one thing and then maybe another thing. And hopefully with a little momentum, we'll be able to make some more convincing points that could perhaps help show that it's essential and important. Yes. Jill.
Marion's exactly right about the funding, the financial component of this. 14 years ago, when they closed that down, they shut down the deaf office. And so now today, the diocese office is not paying for interpreters at Mother of God. The church themselves at Mother of God are paying for the interpreting services. And so the Diocese of Covington refused to support the deaf community. There's just flat out refusal. There's no support there whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Well, that's something that logistics of all of that will be something that we'll have to look at as well. Where do we do that? Like, how do we give incentives for parishes to provide that? I don't know. I don't know how all of the money stuff works. But it would be a good thing for us to look into, to just understand the procedures and policies that are in place and how we can advocate better in those situations as well. Oh, Bob, you're muted.
Right. I have a lot going on in my house. I have to keep muting not to disturb everyone else. Anyway, um, yes, of course it is, and I have encountered that same problem myself, or I would like to believe even more, a lot more would have happened already in the 3 years that I've been in the Respect Life office here in Cincinnati. I wanted to add, perhaps everyone in this conversation knows what they are talking about, but just in case they're talking, there was a deaf office in the Covington diocese, not in the Cincinnati
Right.
diocese, right? That's what was closed 14, 15 years ago. And then when I began starting to advocate here in Cincinnati, it wasn't, Marianne knows it wasn't exactly what I was advocating for, but something started happening in terms of a seminarian coming, right? And I guess none of that ended up working out. So, so over there at St. Rita's. So, but the opportunity is here again to present to the Archbishop that, okay, obviously that did not work. So let's try something else. And hopefully I will have an audience for that. Just as Jill and Marianne and everyone else has said, often the response to me has been, no, we don't have the money. But the response to me has not been, for what it's worth, has not been, I don't care at all. It's just been, okay, we don't have the money. So I do believe that there is hope that I would be able to make a case for the need for something to be found if we're going to make any headway with deaf ministry. I do believe the Archbishop realizes at least the level of, and I know it needs to be so much more, but at least the level of the sacrament of reconciliation itself is simply not available to the deaf community, and that's a gigantic problem. And we need to do something about it. So, so since the first plan essentially did not work 3 years ago, hopefully we are ready to try a different plan, and I will certainly try to advocate for that.
Thank you. I think what we can do from here, like jumping off, it would be to meet again, hopefully in more of a context of like a planning group, to try to come up with some steps that we want to see happen and get some concrete ideas down. And I'd like to invite a few more people to that table so that we can have more voices. And hopefully we would be able to come up with something for Bob to present in those meetings. Does that sound like something that would be we could accomplish? Yeah. Yes. And I will say that the Archbishop.
Yes, all three.
Great. I will say that as the Archbishop has been pretty responsive here in the Archdiocese to, I mean, I wrote a proposal in December and Bob submitted it from our office for this office for persons with disabilities, and it was approved in May. So I know he has a heart for this and he genuinely wants to see things improve here in this area. And I think as long as we come to him with some really well-supported ideas, he's going to listen. So I'm very hopeful. And he even made the office in the middle of COVID, which no one was doing anything then, so. But, yes. So anyway, all right. Does anybody have any final thoughts or anything? No? Oh, Jill, go ahead.
I just to let you know that I didn't receive the link for this meeting. I actually had to ask somebody else to send it to me.
Oh no.
And so I'm not sure why I didn't get it. So I typed my email there in the chat. And so I'm going to put it there if you want to kind of cut and paste it, that way you'll have it. So I'm going to post it now.
Yes.
So I haven't done it yet, but.
Thank you. Mhm.
All right, well, I'll copy that as well, make sure I have that.
Yes, I don't know why you didn't get the email. That's so strange.
I don't know. I don't know.
Probably on our end. We've got a lot of firewalls.
Hey, we do. There are strange things that we cannot do that we ought to be able to do because of firewalls. There we go. I have it. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, wonderful. So I will send that email out either tomorrow or Friday so that we can go ahead and move forward. I'm going to edit the very beginning of this out when we were having trouble with the PowerPoint so that people aren't having to sit through me fumbling. And then I'll get that up and available so you guys have access to it. And so that the people who weren't able to make it tonight will have access as well.
Do you know that the recording is recording Kevin and not you when you speak, Noel? I don't know that.
I think the recording is recording the entire screen, and I have it on gallery. So okay. I will check that. But Kevin was pinned, so regardless, I think Kevin will be recorded for sure.
Okay. Very important little detail for the video to be useful.
Yes. All right. Thank you all so much for participating tonight. It was really valuable, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share and, you know, be patient with me especially and everything. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And again, thank you all. Also, thanks to our interpreter. So
your name is not Kevin, it's Nick, and I'm sorry. I just repeated what Bob said.
I'm sorry too, Nick.
I just thought about it and I was like, oh gosh. All right, anyways. Well, you all have a wonderful
That's totally fine.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Have a great night, everybody.
Bye. Okay.